to the Questing Guild, where we talk all things Dungeons & Dragons. I'm your host, Alexander Speta, and on today's episode, we're going to discuss what exactly is Dungeons & Dragons, and why should you play it. Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game where you and a bunch of your friends sit around a table while someone known as the Dungeon Master will tell a story. While the Dungeon Master is telling the story, the players will make decisions within the story that affect the outcome.
Shouldn't there be a board or some pieces or something to Jenga?
No, this is a role-playing game. It takes place entirely in our collective imagination.
Ooh, Neil.
I tell the story, and you make choices in the story. Okay, let's begin.
Each player in the game will get a chance to create their own character with their own race and class. What Dungeons & Dragons is basically a big improvisational game. You get to make decisions that impact the world around you, and the Dungeon Master and the other players have to react to the decisions that you make. Oh, and did I mention that it takes place in the fantastical world? Sure, there are variations that take place in sci-fi worlds or even the real world, but for the most part, Dungeons & Dragons takes place in the world filled with elves, orcs, goblins, and even the famous Demogorgon from Stranger Things. And the best part about the game is that it all takes place within your imagination, which means that the only limit to you is what you can imagine. Well, the only limitations are your imagination and the dice. The core mechanic of Dungeons & Dragons is that everything is determined by how high or how low you roll with your dice. So for example, if you wanted to try to break a door down, well then you better roll pretty high in your strength. Or if you wanted to persuade a character to give you some information, then you gotta roll pretty high in persuasion. All of this gives the game a feeling of randomness that you can't really find in like regular video games. I love playing video games myself, but the majority of the paths that you take down in video games are already predetermined. When you play Dungeons & Dragons, your options are limitless. Anything can happen depending on how high or how low you roll in your dice. For example, let's take one of my favorite video games and something that is fantasy related, Skyrim. Now in Skyrim, there are two warring factions, the Imperials and the Stormcloaks. Now you can either choose whether to side with the Imperials or side with the Stormcloaks, and depending on what side you choose depends which side wins the war. And overall it is pretty fun. But what if those two options are too boring for you? What if you had something more imaginative in mind? What if you wanted to play both sides? What if you wanted to be a double agent and play them to your benefit? The Dungeon Master will lay down plans for how they want the story to go, but that doesn't mean you have to follow the exact path that the Dungeon Master wants you to follow. You can create your own path, and that's a part of the fun of the game for the Dungeon Master and for the player, because then you have to come up with new creative solutions in order to get around that. So, what exactly do you need in order to play the game? Well, the most important part of the game, like I mentioned before, are the dice, because they determine whether or not the actions that your characters take are successful. You're also going to need character sheets if you're going to be a player. On the character sheet, you're going to write down all your statistics. You're also going to write down your character's race, its class, and if you want, its backstories. And it's also going to detail what weapons and what equipment that your character is carrying. Now, you can find resources to help you out with this online. Personally, I use D&D Beyond in order to create my characters, and so do my players. And if you're going to be the Dungeon Master, well then you're going to need some sort of story planned out, and you're going to need statistics for the monsters that your characters will fight. You can usually find monster stats in the monster manual, which you can buy at any gaming store or online. But if you don't have the money to spend on a monster manual, well luckily for you, everything that you need is a quick Google search away. You'll be surprised at how easy it is to find monster statistics online. And if you're someone who has difficulty coming up with their own original story, no need to worry, because you can just buy a pre-written book and follow that book. Now you can either follow it to the T, or take the parts of the book that you like and rework the parts that you don't like. Because remember, you're the Dungeon Master and you're in control of the story. You've heard me talk about what I like about the game so much, but let's talk to one of our fellow Old Westbury students and see what she likes about Dungeons & Dragons.
My name is Carmela. My major is right now English Language Arts for 7th through 12th grade. The character I play, and she was my very first character that I ever created, was Diora Rosenthorn. She's a tiefling rogue, so she's pretty cool. She's one of my favorites.
What do you get out of playing Dungeons & Dragons? Why do you choose to play the game?
I think it's fun to be able to play someone else in a totally different world. I think it's really cool that you get to create like a different persona that you get to be for a couple of hours a day. I like that you could be really creative with your character as far as like what they wear and like how they act. So it's a good break from like any regular game.
So, now you know what Dungeons & Dragons is and why you should be playing. If you want to learn more about the game and its potential benefits, then make sure you stick around with this show. Until next time, Best of luck on your adventures, traveler.